Sometimes engineers don't just build cars, they build statements, they build obsessions, and sometimes they build machines so over-engineered they almost shouldn't exist. Welcome to the golden age of automotive excess, an era before digital modeling and corporate cost-cutting, when drafting tables were ruled by madmen with slide rules and blank checks. Today, we are opening the vault on 5 vintage marvels from the 1960s to the 1980s that pushed the absolute limits of mechanical sanity. One of these vehicles was so breathtakingly complex that it nearly bankrupted its own manufacturer. Another possessed engineering so highly advanced and temperamental that mechanics were literally afraid to touch it. And the car sitting at our number 1 spot, it featured technology that was decades ahead of its time, a machine perhaps too advanced for its own good. We are going to explore the hidden details, the fanatical precision, and the staggering consequences of automotive hubris. By the time we reach number 1, you'll see why some of these cars were masterpieces and others were engineering madness. Number 5. Consider a vehicle built not for the person holding the steering wheel, but for the VIP isolated in the back seat. Imagine a car designed with such a fanatical devotion to absolute silence and unfailing reliability that it featured entirely redundant mechanical systems. If one critical component failed, a ghost system would immediately take over without the driver ever noticing. Why? Because the dignitary sitting in the rear simply could not be left stranded. Meet the Toyota Century. First rolling out of a highly restricted factory in 1967, this first-generation flagship remained in production for 3 decades, defining Japanese corporate prestige. But this was not your standard commuter vehicle. It was a fortress of isolation. Toyota engineers obsessed over noise, vibration, and harshness to an almost clinical degree. The Century was powered by a bespoke VG Series V8 engine, but power wasn't the goal, smoothness was. To achieve this, engineers implemented dual redundancies that belong on a commercial airliner, not a passenger sedan. It featured twin fuel pumps, twin ignition coils, and dual belts. If one bank of the engine somehow failed, the car could seamlessly limp home on the remaining 4 cylinders. But here is the twist. The obsession didn't stop at the engine bay. The exterior body panels were not simply stamped by automated machines. They were hand-rubbed and shaped over custom-carved wooden bucks by master craftsmen known as takumi. The most surprising fact? Engineers specifically rejected luxury leather for the interior, opting instead for 100% wool. Leather makes a subtle squeaking noise when you shift your weight. Wool is completely, utterly silent. The consequence of this staggering over-engineering was a vehicle of unmatched exclusivity. It wasn't built for mass-market profits. It was built as a rolling symbol of national pride. But as impressive as this redundancy was, it was only the beginning. Number 4. Let's cross the Pacific to an era where American luxury was measured by acre. How do you engineer the ultimate personal luxury coupe in an age of wallowing rear-wheel drive land yachts? You do the impossible. You take a massive, earth-shattering V8 and you engineer a front-wheel drive system capable of handling tremendous torque without violently ripping the steering wheel from your hands. Enter the 1967 Cadillac Eldorado. Throughout the late 1960s and 1970s, the Eldorado was a marvel of packaging. Rear-wheel drive required a massive transmission tunnel that ruined interior space. Cadillac wanted a perfectly flat floor to simulate the feeling of a sprawling luxury lounge. To do this, they created the unitized power package. They took a colossal 429 cubic inch V8, later expanding to an absurd 500 cubic inches, and essentially folded the drivetrain in half. But how do you connect a massive V8 to a transmission mounted alongside it? Cadillac's engineers partnered with Borg-Warner to create a heavy-duty, 2-inch-wide, high-vo silent chain drive. This wasn't some fragile bicycle chain. It was forged with tolerances tighter than those found in professional race cars. It was bulletproof, silent, and incredibly heavy. What made the Eldorado excessive wasn't just the front-end geometry, it was the sheer mass of the components required to make it work seamlessly. The steering knuckles alone looked like they belonged on heavy earth-moving equipment. The suspension utilized torsion bars instead of traditional coil springs to support the immense weight over the front axle. The surprising reality, this massive gamble actually succeeded. The front-wheel drive system was so robust that decades later, custom hot rodders would rip the entire power package out of salvaged Eldorados and mount them in the back of dragsters. The consequence, however, was weight and staggering complexity. The front end was so heavy that front tire wear became a legendary headache for owners. If you think that was excessive, the next car took complexity to a level that made mechanics reconsider their careers.
Number 3. Imagine a team of brilliant German engineers given a blank check and a singular, terrifying directive: build the absolute best car in the world. No budget constraints, no corporate compromises, and absolutely no electric motors. Why? Because electric motors make a faint whining noise, and the elite clientele of this vehicle would not tolerate noise of any kind. This is the Mercedes-Benz 600, famously known as the Grocer. Produced from 1963 all the way to 1981, the Grocer was a mechanical titan. Mercedes-Benz engineers realized that the sheer weight of this armored-capable limousine meant a standard engine wouldn't suffice. So they designed the legendary 6.3-liter M100 V8 engine. But the engine wasn't just there to move the car forward. A significant portion of its horsepower was dedicated to running the comfort hydraulic system. Because electric motors were deemed too loud and too slow, the engineers developed a centralized 150-bar or 2176 psi hydraulic system that functioned like the circulatory system of a living organism. Mineral oil pulsed through brass lines interwoven throughout the entire chassis. This terrifyingly high-pressure system operated the windows, the seats, the sunroof, the trunk, and even the doors. But here is the chilling reality of that engineering choice. The hydraulic window switches weren't electrical toggles, they were direct variable pressure valves. If you pressed the switch lightly, the window crept up silently. If you pressed it hard, the window shot up with enough sheer force to sever a finger, a carrot, or anything else foolish enough to be in its path. There were no safety sensors. The consequence? Unmatched prestige. The Grocer became the vehicle of choice for royalty, celebrities, and notorious dictators alike. But the dark side was the maintenance. A leak in the hydraulic system didn't just break a window, it sprayed high-pressure mineral oil into the cabin and incapacitated the entire vehicle. Repairing the system required a level of specialized knowledge that borders on the arcane. The next two cars changed the industry forever. One nearly destroyed its company. The other proved that overengineering could actually work. Number 2. What happens when you combine avant-garde French aeronautical obsession with temperamental Italian thoroughbred horsepower? You get a vehicle so mathematically complex it required an entirely new breed of technician just to perform an oil change. It had a steering wheel that automatically centered itself even while parked, and an array of 6 headlights encased in aerodynamic glass that physically turned with the front wheels. Behold, the Citroen SM. Produced from 1970 to 1975, the SM was a spaceship trapped in the gravitational pull of Earth. Citroen had recently purchased the legendary Italian automaker Maserati. Their engineers decided to drop a highly strung, complex Maserati V6 engine into a chassis utilizing Citroen's famously eccentric hydropneumatic suspension. This suspension system didn't use normal springs or shock absorbers. Instead, it rode on spheres of nitrogen gas and green LHM hydraulic fluid. The car could raise or lower itself on command, and it could literally drive on 3 wheels if it suffered a blowout. But that wasn't enough for the French engineers. They implemented a system called Dear Avi steering. It was a fully hydraulic, speed-sensitive, variable assist steering system. At 0 miles per hour, you could turn the wheel with a single pinky finger. At 100 miles per hour, the steering became heavy and incredibly rigid to prevent high-speed instability. And the brake pedal? It wasn't a pedal at all. It was a rubber button on the floorboard connected directly to a high-pressure hydraulic valve. The surprising fact is that this car utilized carbon-reinforced resin wheels in the early 1970s, decades before carbon fiber became standard in modern supercars. But the consequence of this madness was catastrophic. Mechanics wept when they opened the hood. To service the Maserati engine's timing chains, the entire motor practically had to be extracted. The complex hydraulic lines were prone to bleeding green fluid onto driveways. It alienated buyers, spawned terrifying warranty claims, and played a massive role in officially bankrupting the Citroen company in 1974. It was a beautiful, tragic masterpiece of excess. We have arrived at the pinnacle.
Number 1 is the Porsche 959. Produced from 1986 to 1993, the 959 wasn't just an evolution of the sports car, it was a technological violent leap forward. Originally conceived for Group B rally racing, the street-legal version became an engineering marvel that made contemporary Ferraris and Lamborghinis look like horse-drawn carriages. At the heart of the 959 was the PSK system, the Porsche Steuerkupplung. In an era when four-wheel drive meant pulling a clunky mechanical lever in a pickup truck, Porsche developed a computer-controlled all-wheel drive system that could dynamically route torque between the front and rear axles depending on traction, acceleration, and slip. It was constantly thinking, constantly adjusting. But the obsession with control extended far beyond the drivetrain. Porsche engineers decided that standard turbo lag was unacceptable, so they engineered a sequential twin-turbocharger setup. A smaller turbo spooled up instantly at low RPMs for immediate throttle response before seamlessly handing off the pressure to a massive secondary turbo at high RPMs to deliver a top speed of 197 miles per hour. Here is the twist that proves just how far ahead of its time the 959 truly was. In 1986, long before the proliferation of onboard computers, this car featured hollow magnesium alloy wheels. Why hollow? Because the engineers integrated an electronic tire pressure monitoring system inside them. If a tire lost air, the car's computer would instantly warn the driver on the dashboard. They also utilized Kevlar, Nomex, and aluminum for the body panels to ensure the car produced absolutely zero aerodynamic lift at 190 miles per hour. The consequence of this unrelenting pursuit of perfection? The 959 cost the company an absolute fortune. Even with a sticker price of $225,000, an astronomical sum in the 1980s, Porsche reportedly lost over $500,000 on every single unit they sold. But unlike the tragic failures of other over-engineered experiments, the 959 succeeded in its true mission. It fundamentally proved that extreme technological complexity could be tamed. It laid the groundwork for the modern hypercar, forever changing how the world approached performance. There is a razor-thin line between pure, unadulterated genius and reckless excess. As we've seen, sometimes engineers don't just build cars, they build obsessions. They build monuments to their own intellect, weaving miles of hydraulic lines, redundant safety systems, and revolutionary computer chips into steel and glass. Some of these machines shattered the limits of physics, while others shattered the bank accounts of the very people who created them. Which brings us to a final question. Looking back at these rolling paradoxes of the 20th century, were these cars brilliant engineering masterpieces, or were they simply cautionary tales of human hubris? Which of these over-engineered machines impressed you the most? Was it the silent redundancy of the Japanese flagship, the terrifying hydraulics of the German limousine, or the space-age technology of the 959? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, respect the machine.